Good morning, everyone. Welcome to a public update meeting regarding the COVID programs that the Urban Redevelopment Authority is running related to housing and commercial business programs. Today, we are going to talk about both of these programs. We are also going to welcome public comments. So you can see the agenda here on your screen. We will start with 3 minutes of public comment from registered commenters. And then we will talk about the current context in the city and in the state regarding COVID and the economics, and then move forward with describing the housing response, the business response, and then do some where it says announcements at the end. We have the Housing Opportunity Fund Advisory Board members are currently on this Zoom call with us today, and they were instrumental in helping with the Housing Stabilization Program when we set this up early on in July. So they will comment after the business response. Next slide. So let us start with registered public commenters. I will call your name and the city will unmute you for public comment. We ask that you try to keep your comments to 3 minutes as much as possible. The first commenter is Alethea Sims. Is Alethea there? Okay, we're going to move on to the second registered commenter, Celeste Scott.
Okay. All right. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to read the comment that we had last week at the URA board meeting that was not read in its entirety. So it's addressed to Jessica Smith-Perry, Center for Housing Opportunities. We, the Housing Justice Table of Pittsburgh United, are incredibly concerned with the abrupt cancellation of this monthly public meeting during a global pandemic regarding the May Advisory Board meeting. While thousands of Pittsburghers struggle to stay in their homes in order to prevent themselves and their neighbors from getting sick and dying, the Housing Opportunity Fund Advisory Board's quarterly meeting scheduled for this week was canceled. This change is unacceptable when our housing crisis is being exacerbated by COVID-19. Community organizers, activists, and advocates, stakeholders who fought for the creation and funding of the Housing Opportunity Fund, are working tirelessly during this crisis, especially with vulnerable populations. In the course of that work, we continue to run into barriers that prevent people from accessing the resources they need to get by, particularly during this global pandemic. With the recent infusion of $2 million of community development block grant money into the Housing Stabilization Program, the public should not only have accurate information this month, but be given the opportunity to comment and dialogue with staff and the advisory board regarding information previously requested, including but not limited to racial and demographic information on who is being served by the consumer program, the plan for the $2 million community development block grant infusion, how the Housing Opportunity Fund will resource residents after the moratoriums are lifted in order to help people get back on their feet, report on 211 referrals and how the coordinated response is faring, the status of eviction defense programming under the Housing Stabilization Program, and we're also adding denial reasons for the Housing Opportunity Fund. And we are still requesting a timeline that we did request last week that has not been received on when this information will be received. We are standing with the Housing Opportunity Fund Advisory Board to hold its monthly meetings as scheduled and meaningfully discuss how it can better address the housing crisis that was already in place and the wave of evictions that could happen during this crisis, barring serious action from city, county, and other elected officials. Many of our elected officials will have a decisive say in how CARES Act funds are allocated locally. We know that this crisis requires an unprecedented level of response and support for Pittsburgh's residents. The advisory board meeting is an important forum for the discussion of these issues, and we ask that it proceed as scheduled in the future. Additionally, the Housing Opportunity Fund is a critical vehicle to ensure that urgently needed resources are available and being deployed equitably to those most impacted and experiencing housing issues during the time. Respectfully submitted, the Housing Justice Table of Pittsburgh United, which includes over 50 organizations and individuals. Thank you.
Thank you, Celeste. Let's move to the next public commenter, Ann Wright.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
My name is Ann Wright. My husband, Randy Sargent, and I live at 3634 Fraser Street. Together with fellow residents of South Oakland, we founded and run an after-school technology and arts program in our neighborhood, serving a 90% Black population of local youth. Over recent decades, as rents have gone up faster than the incomes of our families, we in Oakland have lost 40% of our Black neighbors. In the past 3 years, as I've been helping run our after-school program, I've watched 7 families of our kids lose their housing, all families of color. I've seen our neighborhood's evicted children and parents separated when they become homeless. I've seen our parents and children lose their possessions on the curb when they have no place to bring them. And I regret most that I've seen some of our youth lose their way after displacement away from their friends and support network to neighborhoods with reduced public transit and opportunity. COVID-19 threatens every resident's health, safety, and financial security. The data shows that these health and economic impacts are disproportionately borne by those same families who were already at risk before COVID-19 started. In response, the Housing Opportunity Fund must focus efforts on making support for residents for housing stabilization as accessible as possible for the most vulnerable residents. Given the large number of families who couldn't make rent and all the challenges moving forward, we need especially to focus on resources on keeping these families in their homes. This ought to include monies from the $2 billion CDBG grant as well as funding from the CARES Act. The county moratorium on eviction cases proceeding through the courts ends June 2nd, and the state moratorium on eviction filings ends June 10th. So it's critical that these funds are able to efficiently reach those in danger of displacement. I encourage the HOF to work with boots-on-the-ground housing advocates, such as those in the Hill Consensus Group, the Wellness Collective, and Casa San Jose, to streamline processes and communication. I'm also concerned by reports that tenants are being denied help based on the intransigence of their landlords, in either being behind on their city taxes or not cooperating adequately in the application process. This deepens inequity, as the most vulnerable residents are also those most likely to have uncooperative and non-compliant landlords. Tenants should not be penalized and denied access for these reasons. Finally, the Housing Opportunity Fund must be transparent in reporting the effectiveness of its programs, reporting demographic information, including race of those helped. Transparency is critical to documenting the Housing Opportunity Fund's success in equitably reaching those most at risk. Democracy requires public input and transparency to keep the public informed. Lastly, I want to extend my gratitude for the difficult and critical work you do and will do to help those most in need from this crisis and the slow recovery afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. The next registered speaker is Crystal Jennings.
Good morning, everybody. Sorry, dog is trying to get in the way. Good morning, Crystal Jennings speaking on behalf of City of Bridges CLT this morning. The CDBG infusion and any other COVID response funds that may be made available should be used not just to deal with the current emergency, but should also invest in the creation of more just and equitable housing system in our city. One example of this is in the city of Oakland, California. Just last year, created a dedication fund to support tenants at risk of displacement and creation permanently affordable cooperative housing. This kind of public investment can immediately subsidize tenants at risk of displacement, create long-term security, and transition low-income renters who in Pittsburgh or disproportionately minority households from renting to owning. Taking power back from absentee landlords and spectators and returning it to individuals and communities. We must address current needs, but we must also work to make sure that when the next crisis hits, and there will be another one, more people are better positioned to deal with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Crystal. Those are all the registered public commenters. Let me just check to make sure Alethea Sims did not join. Alethea, are you there? Okay. We will be moving on now to provide some update on the housing and business programs. So here you can see some factoids on the slide. In the state of Pennsylvania right now, 20 million residents have lost their jobs since March. It is expected that unemployment may go as high as 30% of the population. In the state, these are state numbers, not local, but there's approximately 1.6 million renters. 44% of those are cost burdens. They're paying more than 30% of their monthly income on housing. In Pittsburgh, it is estimated that over a third of Pittsburgh adult population does not have a savings account. And additionally, this last factoid is from the needs assessment that was done a few years ago, but there's an estimated shortage of approximately 20,000 affordable units in the city of Pittsburgh right now. So it is obvious that the economic situation resulting from COVID is affecting low-income individuals at a greater rate than upper income. This next slide puts the housing need into some context. So, you know, based on the economic situation, the current need is that the government must help the tenants and homeowners pay their monthly housing expenses for up to 3 months. So here's the response, and I need to thank the folks that are watching and the advisory board members that are on the call, and you will hear from at the end of this call. Back in July 2019, we rolled out the Housing Stabilization Program. This program was it was a direct result of all the community meetings and advocacy efforts around the Housing Opportunity Fund, and really from all the public meetings regarding the Housing Opportunity Fund, it became very apparent that there needed to be a program that could help folks prior to them being eligible for federal housing programs, such as ESG RAN programs that require people to meet the federal definition of homeless. So this program was rolled out in July, and it was originally sourced and still is sourced in part by the city's Housing Opportunity Fund. This is a local source of funding that the city has committed for 12 years. The total Housing Opportunity Fund is $10 million a year. The HSP line item has ranged anywhere from $750,000 to $1 million a year to help households in need of paying their rent or security deposits or utility payments. It can pay up to 3 months or a maximum of $3,000, whichever comes first. The goal of the program is to provide that short-term temporary assistance that a family needs to stabilize their housing so that they do not go into homelessness or do not ever meet that definition of federal definition of homelessness, and they can keep their household stable and they do not need to uproot their family. So that is the goal of the program. Next slide. So you can see in July 2019, when this program started, the Housing Opportunity Fund allocated $750,000. There were 2 more 2019 and 2020 allocations of funding. Since it started in July 2019, 350 households have been helped through the Housing Stabilization Program. You can see in the box, the funding amount is $3,000. It is a grant. The households do have to be less than 50% of area median income, and they must be experiencing a crisis where this assistance can help to stabilize them. Next slide. So this program started in July. When COVID occurred, and the economy started to change. In March 2020, the advisory board for the Housing Opportunity Fund voted to transfer $300,000 from the 2019 HOF demonstration fund line item into a COVID version of the HSP program. This COVID version ran very similarly to HSP. It still provides up to $3,000 of assistance for rent, utility, security deposits for households below 50% AMI. It can also provide up to $3,000 to homeowners who are below 80% AMI for mortgage payments to keep them current with their mortgage. So that's sort of the new portion of the COVID HSP. Currently, those $300,000 that was transferred in the middle of March has been committed to existing applicants of the program. Therefore, it is critical that we continue to fundraise and bring in new resources of money. Next slide. As part of that fundraising, the City of Pittsburgh has worked with the URA, and through City Council, they have agreed to transfer $2 million of the CDBG stimulus funding coming from the federal government through the CARES Act for the Housing Stabilization Program. $1 million of that will be used for tenant assistance. $1 million of that will be used for mortgage assistance. In addition, the URA staff has been very busy trying to fundraise additional sources of funding for this program. The Pittsburgh Foundation has recently awarded $400,000 to the program. Wells Fargo has also awarded $40,000, and we are continuing to fill out additional government and philanthropic applications to continue to fundraise. But with existing HOF funding that we already had, the new 2020 HOF HSP money that will be coming, and then the CDBG and these other awards, we have approximately $4 million at this point to help homeowners and tenants that are in need. That will help approximately 1,000 households moving forward. Next slide. I'm going to pass it off at this point for Jeremy Carter, who is the manager of our consumer community programs, to walk you through this.
Thanks. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. So I just wanted to go over the timeline of what happened with COVID HSP. I think our entire Housing Opportunity Fund team worked really hard to develop and respond, develop a program and respond to this in a very short amount of time. So on March 13 is when we really started to have conversations with the Urban League, knowing that a significant need is coming. So we had conversation with them, and then about 3 days later designed the COVID-19 HSP program guidelines in consultation with the Urban League. The next day is when the Housing Opportunity Fund awarded the $300,000 from the demonstration program to fund the program. 2 days later is when we did a press release. The following Monday is when we really started the collaboration with community partners, including organizations serving immigrants and refugees. But then within a week is when we had to stop applications because we have received nearly 3,000% increase in our demand for the program within 3 weeks. Next slide. So this is a snapshot of where we are at right now. So like Jessica said, we have nearly $4 million of funding for the program. So we are starting to see more and more mortgage applicants coming in. To date, we have between 35 and 40 mortgage applicants and well over 200 clients for rental assistance somewhere in the process right now. And we are seeing some of the most represented occupations and industries within service, education, including schools, and the gig economy. Next slide. So these are some demographics of people that are being served within the HSP program. Nearly 80% of households are at the 30% AMI or below. And of everyone within HSP, 75% of them are saying that their financial need is directly related to COVID-19, and we continue to see that number increase. We're also seeing 80% of households are minority households and 56% are female head of households as well. In terms of program access, this was a concern once everyone was under the stay-at-home order, and we wanted to ensure that people would still be able to do their intakes, while still staying home. So we are happy to see that nearly 90% of people were able to complete their intake completely remotely, just by using an internet connection. The other 14% are able to complete their intakes in person with a social service provider. So that 496, that is currently in the process, anywhere from they have reached the service provider and began the process all the way through trying to issue payment. And like I said, with Urban League, we have received over 50 applications for immigrant and refugee households for rental assistance. And as a reminder, anyone requesting HSP assistance should call 211. Like I just said, if anyone is in need, they do need to go through 211, not through the social service providers. There are a variety of ways to get in contact with 211, as well as they are able to translate in over 170 different languages to accommodate people whose English is not their primary language. Now I'm going to pass it off to Jennifer Wilhelm to talk about the business response.
Thanks, Jeremy. Good morning, everyone. I want to quickly brief you on some of the things that we're doing to help businesses in this time. So in early March, the URA quickly stood up a program that would help small businesses across the city to deal with the COVID-19 challenges. Our first program that launched was an emergency loan program, which provides up to $15,000 at 0% interest to businesses who have been affected by COVID-19. We are also in the process right now of launching a new program. It's going to go to the URA board next month in June for approval. With that program, it'll be a larger dollar amount. We are hoping to be able to provide businesses up to $75,000, again, zero in low interest rate loan, in order to come up from the COVID and recover their businesses, reopen if they've had to shut, hire new employees or hire back employees that they may have had to let go. And we're very excited about that. To date, the URA has closed on over 160 of these small emergency loans and deployed over $2.3 million to businesses across the city. Next slide, please. This is our dashboard showing you the overall response thus far in the last 2 months of running the up to $15,000 loan program. We are very happy to report that we have helped businesses all over the city in all industries, from restaurants and food to services and any really industry you can think of. We continue to run this program. If you know small businesses that are in need of these dollars, they can find the information on our website pretty easily or reach out to a URA staff member to learn more. We are happy to help in any way that we can. Now I'm going to send it back to Jeremy to finish up. Thank you.
Just a few quick announcements. We have extended the deadline for the RFP for Housing Stabilization Program 2020 allocation. Those applications are now due on May 26th at 2 p.m. So that's next Tuesday. Also, the next HOF Advisory Board meeting will be in this similar format, which will be June 4th at 9 a.m. And I believe I'll turn it over to Jessica.
Thank you, Jeremy. Yes, so thank you, everybody. Couple of things. There's some public comment speaking towards the Housing Opportunity Fund process. I do want to address that really quickly, and then I also would like to give the HOF advisory board members an opportunity to speak at this point. There was some concern that the monthly HOF meeting was canceled in May. Couple of quick comments on that. The URA has administered this program for 2 years and has held a meeting every month from the very beginning. The legislation requires quarterly meetings, and we have well surpassed that every month since we're doing it 3 times a quarter with 3 meetings a month. Additionally, we had a meeting about 2 weeks prior to the canceled meeting to be able to transfer the COVID funding for the program. So during the meeting, staff was very busy getting applications out, and there was not actions for that meeting. So we do apologize for concern that has held. We have briefed the public at our board meeting, and we scheduled this meeting as a response to that as well. And we will continue to meet monthly with the advisory board, starting the next meeting, which will be the first Thursday of June. And to Jeremy's comment, it will also be aired through this mechanism. So next, I would like to give the advisory board members who were very instrumental in helping us create the HSP program. The housing advocates, the advocacy community, and the advisory board were both very instrumental in the creation of this program. So I have two members have pre-registered. Other members that are on the line, if you would like to speak, please send me a chat and I will call on you so that we can do this in an orderly fashion. I'm going to start with Joanna Dimming.
All right, thank you so much for the opportunity. So just, I guess I'll touch on a couple things. One was kind of the, oh, and thank you to your staff. I know this has been a crazy turnaround on everything. So thank you for being, you know, getting everything up and running, understanding the need, you know, for people to get help. So first was around the HSP, you know, how is the 50% for renters versus homeowners determined, and does it apply to any funds, you know, for HSP? Because I know we had the 300 that we allocated and then, or we recommended for allocation, and then there was 400 from Pittsburgh Foundation. So yeah, how is that determined? Is that the right mix, you know, of support? Because I know there's the HEMAP program at the state level and things like that for homeowners. What will happen, let's see, with the businesses, it's great to see, you know, you had so many applicants that were women and minority-owned businesses, but what % were approved from those demographics? I know that one of the challenges for even like the Paycheck Protection program has been making sure MWBE businesses benefit. And since this was for existing businesses, I know you guys are opening that up, so that may help to address that, but I'm just wondering about that. And then, you know, maybe, I know the Housing Opportunity Fund may not be the place for like a lot of working out the nuance of implementation of these programs, but it is something that we all care about. And so maybe we have a working group or something to address, you know, to understand, you know, what some of the challenges people are having accessing the program. We've been hearing some things about like the application length, which I know, you know, you addressed, Jessica, at the URA meeting, but, you know, learning a little bit more about that, the kind of the means testing, like, you know, paper pay stubs and what other things that are barriers. And then, you know, just understanding like the number, like the process, like with 211, like what does it actually look like? How many barriers are there within that, or what challenges might there be? And then looking at kind of the, again, it's great to have the demographic data, but like, how do we get to, I know it's been recommended by a couple of people that we do something with Create Lab, and I've been learning more about what they're doing. And I think what they could do for us is provide like a neighborhood context and like a context around what's happening in Pittsburgh, you know, and the decisions that we're making to make sure that, you know, everything leads to more equity, you know, racial equity, and really helps us meet our goals. So I, you know, whether maybe they could do a presentation for us to show what they're capable of, because I know URA has tons of capacity for GIS and things like that. So it might just be helpful to see like what they have in mind as well. So those are my comments.
Thank you. So what we'll try to do is give short answers to advisory board members' comments, and then recognize that some of the questions may you know, cause a further discussion in the future, or potentially at the June advisory board meeting. But I did hear several questions there, and I'll try to address a couple of them quickly. The first one was the income requirements. So the advisory board members know that the HOF money, you know, we have to allocate by certain income levels, 50% of 30% AMI, 25% of 50, and 25% of 80. So when we do the allocation plan each year, the programs are identified at those income levels. And the HSP program has been pretty much solely sourced at 50% AMI. The demonstration funding did have about $180,000 at that 80% AMI, which was being used for the mortgage assistance portion of the program. The CDBG also has its own income. So now that this program is starting to become multi-sourced, you know, it's going to become even more complicated because every source is going to have their own income. But CDBG is tied to the income levels that were already, you know, set up. The renters at 50 and the homeowners at 80. So basically, we have to go by the funding sources, and we can talk about this, you know, in more detail later. But for right now, the majority of our funds are still tied at those income levels. I also see Jennifer Wilhelm turned her video on and can respond to the question about the minority businesses.
Yes. So our loan programs are absolutely accessible to minority and women-owned businesses. I can provide you that data that you requested. So at our applications, 37% of our applications were minority applicants, and 37 of our loans closed went to minority applicants. And for women, 42% of our applications were from women-owned businesses, and 49% of our loans that closed were to women-owned businesses. So our data is absolutely tracking that those who apply, it's the same proportion of people that are actually receiving a loan. I'm sorry, but I don't remember. I think you had a second business question. Was there another question I could answer for you?
I think I just said the new round will be open to people that don't have loans, so that'll hopefully provide opportunity for people that haven't worked with the URA.
Yeah, so for, I guess there are two things I think you mentioned too. So for businesses, this is really, our COVID programs are for existing businesses, and our $15,000 loan is running right now. And as I mentioned, we're hoping to start a larger loan up to $75,000 at the end of June, pending URA board approval. And then we'll be advertising that widely to all the groups and partners. And we're looking forward to trying to help as many businesses as we can.
Thank you. And then Joanna, a couple of your other quick questions. Yes, we will welcome a presentation from Ann's group at Carnegie Mellon in the future, at a future meeting. We can get that set up. And then additionally, you did ask a question about the immigrant populations and the non-English speaking populations, and I see a lot of questions coming through the chat on that. We are working to make that as easy as a process as possible. We were alerted a couple weeks ago that a federal type of form was being used for non-English speaking populations. We are working to see how to reduce that. Jeremy, can you speak a little bit to this topic?
Yeah, so I think one confusion is, what is HSP requirement and what's a requirement from the social service provider? The HSP application is 5 pages or less. And then we also have to understand that the different social service providers also have their own internal required forms based on their funding and reporting. In this case, Urban League had more forms as they are a HUD certified counseling agency. And so there were additional forms that were required. But days after that board meeting, when we heard about that issue, we did work with Urban League to eliminate at least 30 pages from that. Another clarification I need to make is that there are not more paperwork. There's not more paperwork required for non-English speakers. What happened was that information is typically gained in an in-person interview or over the phone. Because we have organizations helping in between, from the immigrants and refugee applicants to the organizations, then to Urban League, those organizations took on the role of translating the information that is typically gained in an intake appointment with the providers. Although it may seem like there's more paperwork required, I think it's the same information required for everyone. It's just, the different way of doing these intakes.
Thank you, Jeremy. Okay, let's move on to the next advisory board member, Mark Masterson.
Good morning, everybody. I want to kind of echo some of the comments I submitted to the URA board about public process. During a pandemic, it's important that we're creative and deliberate in maintaining public channels of communication so we can get feedback about what's working and what's not working. We know that the devastation that's coming and is already here from the pandemic is going to be hardest on low-income people and neighborhoods. The inequality that existed before COVID-19 is just going to be all that much worse during and after. And it's going to be a long road to recovery from all the economic projections that I'm reading. We haven't seen unemployment like it is right now since the Great Depression. And a lot of the businesses that we knew and loved before are just not going to make it. That's kind of what I do professionally, and we're just seeing that that's going to be the reality when this is done. So there's going to be a tremendous amount of unemployment, especially in the hospitality industry, and places where a lot of the folks that we're assisting are not going to be working for at least the next months. And that's why we've got an obligation to understand whether the people most in need are having trouble accessing our resources. I appreciate that we've got it down to, we eliminated 20 pages, but if you don't have a computer and you can't go somewhere in person or don't feel safe doing that because of the pandemic, you've got a real problem if you need help. So again, if we can continue to listen to that feedback, and it's not a gotcha sort of situation, it's just really, how can we address it? Jeremy, I'm glad that you got on that so quickly, but are there more things that we can do? And can we talk to the providers that they can reduce the things that they're asking for, at least during the pandemic, to make it as easy as possible for folks to get the help that they need. We've also got an obligation to make the information, especially on demographics of who we're helping and who's applying, and maybe who we're not helping and who isn't applying. We need to make that public. I'm really hopeful that the HOF and the URA can work with Ann over at Creative Lab to get that information out there. They have a great way of contextualizing and bringing understanding in a way that's very easy for people to understand. And they do a fantastic job. I'm hopeful, Jessica, that you're able to reach out to her before the next board meeting, just to at least understand if a partnership and a collaboration is feasible. It doesn't mean that you have to have it implemented or have to have a plan, but to talk with them, I think it'd be beneficial and it'd be a great relationship to establish. we didn't have enough money before the crisis to fund things like HSP and homeowner assistance, and those two types of programs are going to be under immense pressure because the need is going to just be enormous. And to that end, I've got some questions. Have we been talking to Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and anybody else on what they're doing and how we can coordinate and maybe get funding for homeowner assistance to keep people from losing their homes through foreclosure? That's the real thing. We want to preserve those affordable units that low-income families are living in that they own, and they're going to be most in danger of getting foreclosed on if they've got a mortgage on the house and people have lost their jobs. Also, the state has approximately $4.1 billion in CARES funds that they've got to sort of pass through in the form of grants to agencies. It could be like the URA and the Housing Opportunity Fund. Can we find, has anybody been talking to the governor's office and DCED from the Housing Opportunity Fund about housing aid? Have we been talking to State Senator Costa from Allegheny County, who's the minority leader in the state Senate? Has anybody been talking to State Representative Jake Wheatley, who's Democratic chair of the House Finance Committee, about what they're going to do? The money has to be spent, not just contract with somebody like the URA, but actually in people's hands by December 30th of 2020. It's been sitting in a state bank account since April. Time is of the essence. They're going to start moving quickly. I hope that we've been talking to them about it, because those are grants that could fund exactly what we need it to fund here in Pittsburgh through the Housing Opportunity Fund. And we should be talking with them because we can't get the whole $4 billion, but we might be able to get a big chunk of that, millions of dollars to help folks. And then finally, I'm going to circle back to community input and collaboration. It's a difficult time. I never thought I'd be so great at video conferencing. I don't know if I'm great or not, but I'm a lot more adept than I was when this started. I think that it's important that we continue to find creative ways to engage the public, because we're going to get some great ideas and find out some problems in our processes that we need to improve. And we need to be working hard to be sure that part of what we do is it gets better and better as we continue to go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Couple of quick responses. You brought up Ann's group again. Yes, we'll reach out. In terms of the additional funding through all the different stimulus packages, rest assured the URA is keeping quite the eye on this. David Geiger, our Assistant Director for Legislative Affairs, I don't think he's still on the call, but we can have him give a report on that. Actually, there's David.
Yeah, Mark, to answer your question, we have been in contact with state legislators. I also convene a policy advocacy working group with some of our intergovernmental partners. So we're working on advocacy efforts there. I mean, to your point, the money's there. The legislator knows they need to spend it. There are disagreements between the four caucuses and the governor. They can't even seem to settle on how they want to do a state budget, whether it's bifurcated or a whole year. So, we're working through it. We have lobbyists on it. So we're going to try and get some of that money is the short answer.
Actually the governor doesn't need the legislature on this $4 billion. I know that they're trying to do it in a bipartisan way. But it's important to share that, and maybe that's where the advocates can help to advocate, whereas you guys might not be able to do that as forcefully as folks that are on this call and some of the networks that we're all in can help turn the pressure up on both the Ds and the Rs to get them to some kind of consensus on this. Because this, there's going to be problems across the state. It's, the pandemic didn't just hit the city of Pittsburgh or Philadelphia. It hit everybody. The economic impacts are pretty widespread. There are low-income families that are going to be impacted in Greene County just as much as low-income families in the city of Pittsburgh. So I think that people understand the need, and maybe we can help with driving some of the consensus and the sense of urgency. So if you can communicate that would be wonderful, or to keep in touch with the advisory board members at least, and then we can help get the word out.
Sure, Mark, I understand the concern. I just want to sort of make it clear that staff is waiting, like legislative staff is hesitant to move because they're waiting on guidance from Treasury and the feds on how this money can be spent, which isn't helping anyone. And despite the governor's ability to move unilaterally, I can tell you, encouraging him to move unilaterally and pressuring him to do so would only backfire down the road on the actual state budget and other legislative priorities that we're pushing for, like an increase in fair funding, a state LIHTC bill. I mean, it just doesn't help anyone to encourage the governor to move forward by himself.
I wasn't saying that at all. I just said that he has the ability to, which is leverage for the other folk, the legislators to maybe move together. I had another question related to funding. Is URA looking internally for stuff that's on your balance sheet right now to rededicate some of those resources that have been assets at the URA for the past probably 20 years that were paid for? I'm referring to the Pittsburgh Development Fund. There should be resources there that could be rededicated. That was paid for with city bond funds, general obligation in the 1990s during Mayor Murphy's term. That was $65 million that was given to the URA. Has the URA considered reprogramming any of those funds to address some of the housing needs?
Yes, the URA is looking at all of our resources right now. I can't speak to any of them in specifics, but we are, doing everything we can to make sure we have funding available. And when this first, started in the middle of March, the URA deployed some of its own resources within a week to help on the commercial side to help keep businesses paying their employees as much as we could. So I'll be happy to, talk to you more about that sometime in the future. Okay. I've been trying to keep an eye on the chat. I don't believe I've seen additional advisory board members. If there is another advisory board member that would like to speak, can you wave at me or say hi? I see Derek, and I see Councilwoman Teresa Castanets and Jamil Bey. So we will go in that order. Let's start with Derek.
Okay, thank you. One, just some of the same things that were already said, I don't think will resolve today. So I think our suggestion would be to kind of create a working group to work through some of these things more in detail, like, long applications, et cetera, where we could really just have some dedicated time to actually work through the application, see what all the steps are, and then maybe we can recommend adjustments to be made. So really getting into the details. As far as, just kind of on the data thing, again, I think we need data for who's being served, but also who's being denied. So really those denial demographics as well, and the reasons for denial. The reason why all of this is important, because again, it would allow us to properly make adjustments when and where needed. So just kind of driving that home. My other question was about all these additional funds that are coming in already. So the $4 million funds, will they be subject to advisory board oversight? And why not? If not, and what can we do? Because again, we want to make sure that you know, that we're incorporating our ideas as well as some of the public's interest as it relates to those additional funds. And then on the housing, on the 211 process, I know while we kind of talked about going in that direction, but we're hearing a lot of that the process is convoluted. So I would really like to just understand or hear an explanation of what the 211 process is from the moment someone makes the call to the moment someone's actually being served. Again, if that needs to be adjusted, I think that's something that's done offline, but I would like to hear what that process is. On the business side, I'm hearing, I did hear the demographics and I appreciate that. I'm still hearing that MBEs are not being served. And I'll get more specific. African American businesses, specifically with the SBA programs. I'm not sure if African American businesses are being served with the URA programs, but would like to delve into the actual MBE percentage a little bit more specifically. And then I have read and also heard on this call that the funds are for at least initially were for URA existing borrowers, but what about others that were not existing borrowers?
Okay, that was multi-thronged as well with questions. So Jennifer, are you still on?
Yes, I'm still here. So just to clarify, our programs are not only for existing URA borrowers, they are for any business. Any business that is located inside the city limits of Pittsburgh can certainly apply. Our program is application driven, and so any business is eligible to apply that meets that not residency, but inside the city of Pittsburgh requirement. It does not matter if you are a previous URA borrower or not. That has no bearing on your eligibility. And in terms of delving more into the minority numbers, I'm not exactly, if you can elaborate on specifically what you're looking for. I did talk a little bit about the percentages of minority applicants versus the percentage of minority loans that were closed. Are there other metrics that you're asking for?
So African American, Black-owned businesses, you know, have not been being served again by the PPP program. You know, there was, you know, I'm having conversations and it's like, did you get money? Did you get money? So I'm seeing that a lot of Black-owned businesses are not being served specifically. So just wanted to hear a little bit about, you know, the URA's programs, and I heard kind of minority, it's a broad term. So more specifically about Black-owned businesses, you know, how's that faring with your programs? And again, if we're not meeting that metric, how can we be intentional about ensuring that we make some adjustments?
Currently, we do not ask applicants what specific ethnicity they identify with. We simply ask if they consider themselves to be a minority or a woman. I can tell you that 95% of, at least 95% of that data is Black businesses when I say minority. I suspect there is 1 to 3 percentage points there that may be a different ethnicity, but here in Pittsburgh, for the applicants that we're getting, as I see every single application that comes through, I can assure you that at least 95%, if not more, of minority numbers are referring to Black-owned businesses.
Thank you. Thanks, Jennifer. A couple other parts of your questions, Derek. You know, this program is, you asked about funding sources. The Housing Opportunity Fund is an advisory board set up to help with program guidelines for HOF funded sources, and also with the annual allocation plan and reviewing loans coming from the HOF programs. We will continue to take, you know, HOF related funding source items and to the advisory board The URA board is the governing board for both HOF and for the URA's other resources. And we will continue to update the general public through the HOF process and through the URA board process and all other public processes such as this meeting today. And I can't remember if I feel like there was a third theme to your question, and I'm drawing a blank right now.
So to piggyback on the response you just gave, I understand that difference, governance versus kind of coming up with guidelines, et cetera. So those guidelines, will the advisory board be instrumental in new funds? Because now today we're talking about an additional 4 million, tomorrow maybe 10 million. So are we also instrumental in the guidelines, adjustments, et cetera, for new funds that are coming in? And then my last question was about, can you walk us through the 211 process from the moment someone makes the call to actually being served, what that process looks like?
Sure. I can't speak in details to your previous, question. The Housing Opportunity Fund Advisory Board, set up for the review and oversight of the Housing Opportunity Fund. That's the short answer I can give you right now. In terms of the 211 question, Jeremy, can you get back on and talk about that in a little bit more detail?
Yep. So when someone calls 211, 211 operators are doing a phone screening for basic eligibility of the program. That phone screening takes about 5 to 7 minutes on average. If they are screened as eligible, they are either referred to a service provider, but if all of the service providers are at capacity, which is often, then they go on to a waiting list that URA administers. And then as providers tell us that they have capacity, we are then forwarding those referrals from the wait list. So once the referral actually gets to the service provider, they have, we're asking them to get in contact with them within 24 or 48 hours to at least get in contact with them. And then it's just a matter of the service providers being able to schedule them in to do intakes. And of course, 90% of these are over the phone intakes. What we're seeing is that the most lag time is just trying to get all the documentation together. So, once the service provider actually starts working with them on documentation and intake, it's looking like it's about 3 weeks to then getting the payment issued, but we are also seeing it could take as little as 1 to 2 weeks.
Thank you, Jeremy. I just received a text from Councilwoman Kell-Smith. She had to jump off to address something else quickly. So I'm going to move to Jamil Bey.
Good morning. So a lot of what I wanted to ask about was already somehow in these between the chats and the conversations and Derek's questions and going back to Joanna and Mark's points. It seems like we keep having these same sort of loggerheads and big picture thinking. That's where we need to focus some real attention on just working out ironing this process out so that that we always err on the side of transparency, efficiency, and thinking about the people who are coming to us for service are people who are obviously at a very frustrating point in their life, and we're the lifeline. And this process has to be as smooth as possible. And as we're designing and developing these, and with full recognition of the need for accountability and making sure that the money's being handled properly, and making sure that there's no room for that, and being able to report back to the auditors, we still have to find what's the smoothest, easiest way to get money out the door and into people's hands. What are all the potential barriers? We really just have to get better at that. And it's not a criticism of any particular body, but all of us, as we think about designing these programs, we need to be thinking about the end user. And when that end user is coming to us, we don't want to add to the confusion or be a part of the problem. How do we just knock that out? that people understand where the money is going. And $10 million doesn't go very far. $4 million doesn't go very far. Where does it go? Who's being served? Okay, at least now I understand that it's not me that's being mistreated. There just wasn't enough money in the system. So it's a combination of efficiency, transparency, accountability, and, you know, a way to overcome the bureaucracy. And I said, the comments have already been addressed, but I think that's how we need to be thinking about going forward. What's this look like?
Yes, thank you, Jamil. I think we full-heartedly agree that we want to try to make this as easy for the clients as possible, and we're really working to try to do that. And Jeremy's meeting with the program administrators constantly. When we bring on a new team of program administrators in the upcoming weeks, we will also be, meeting with them regularly and updating them. And we just ask that the advisory board and that the general public continue to alert us when they hear about the kinks in the system, as that's what happened last week when we learned about a longer form being used for non-English speaking populations, and so that we can hurry and try to address them as much as possible. Is there any other?
Jump in real quick. Just going back to what I had mentioned before, connected to that, I think a better idea to look at it is a working group with the advisory board, the URA staff, and the advocates to collectively kind of respond to these things, as opposed to the way it's kind of been done before. So just want to interject that.
So a proactive way to anticipate kinks and problems, before the rollout.
Okay.
And it also might be like taking the view of what's the absolute minimum that you need to roll out money, quickly. And that you might, it doesn't mean that you're never going to be in contact with those folks again. But, if you don't have every piece of paper are there things that we can cut out to get money out more quickly, and then we can back end verify some of this stuff, and take people at their word to start, and then try to verify it as they're moving through the process, but get them to help lower that initial barrier, and or stagger it. Maybe they don't get, if they got a $3,000 grant, they're getting some portion of it dispersed if they complete. Hey, we got 10 questions on the questionnaire that we needed, and we can disperse 1,000 to that to help them right now. And to get the rest of it, we need to we need to figure out how to get the rest of the things that we need to do the verification. But if there are ways to change the process so that that initial disbursement can happen quickly.
Okay, we will take all suggestions to heart. I will say that as this program becomes multi-source and we receive federal funding for the program, there are federal guidelines, rules, and restrictions for CDBG funding and other funds, hopefully coming in the future through stimulus that we will need to follow. That may complicate that a little bit, but what we will do is, to Derek's suggestion about a working group, we will look into establishing a working group and figuring out the representation from the different, like from the advisory board and the community and the social service providers and government, and try to come up with a team of folks to proactively address these situations. So thank you. Is there any other advisory board member that has not gotten an opportunity to speak that would like to do so? I do not have everyone up on my screen, but I am not seeing anybody. If somebody is there, please shout out. Okay, so not seeing or hearing anybody, I will just move to end the meeting. I want to, this is not an actual advisory board meeting, so I don't need a resolution for that, but I want to thank everybody for getting on this
Jessica,
Zoom meeting.
Before,
Yes,
there's
Mark.
been several additional questions that have come up in the Zoom group chat. Is it possible for you to look at that, maybe can provide some answers, and if you don't have them, you know, we can at least know that those are things that people that took the time to attend today are interested in.
I'm seeing some questions. I'm seeing Jeremy responding to a lot of them, so please look at responses. I see a question from Joanna about the federal guidelines, and will that affect people that are being sourced by a different program or different source? That's a really good question. We need a program that is operational and you know, able to administer. We would like to keep one unified program as much as possible, but I do understand the question, and we will need to look into that and give you a more detailed answer on that. If someone calls Allegheny Link, is there a warm handoff? Oh, that's actually a statement from Jeremy, and this is very important. If someone calls Allegheny Link instead of the United Way, and the Allegheny Link staff realize that the person's situation is such that this program, HSP, would better help them, they make that warm handoff to 211. So that's a really important thing to announce. There is a working relationship and partnership between 211 and Allegheny Link, and they make referrals specifically to each program, because our housing stabilization program, you know, is designed to address folks prior to meeting that federal definition of homeless. If people need longer term support and they meet that federal definition of homeless, there are other programs that are being sourced by other parts of the stimulus package through the ESG program that may be a better fit. And it is very important to let people know that 211 and Allegheny Link are helping to get people into the program that will best help them. I'm not really seeing any other questions that looks like wasn't addressed via the chat. We will make sure we look through this chat in more detail and address anything at the next advisory board meeting, which is in 2 weeks. Is there any other questions people are seeing in the chat that need addressed? Okay, I know the city does have another meeting coming up, so I will move to end this meeting. I want to thank everybody so much for participating, and I look forward to seeing you all electronically in 2 weeks. Thank you.